So we now know that Xabi Alonso is not going to be the next Liverpool manager. Reports emerging yesterday that the Spaniard is more minded to stay at Bayer Leverkusen for at least another season rather than make the move to either Liverpool, Bayern Munich and Real Madrid, the three clubs who've been most strongly linked with him, and of course three clubs that he represented as a player. And I think I have to say, from my perspective, even though I picked him out as the outstanding candidate for the Liverpool job, I have to say I'm not massively surprised by this decision for a couple of reasons. I think the first of those is obviously I want to repay the faith that Leverkusen showed in him in appointing him as a manager when he had such little experience behind him and giving him this big opportunity. But I also think it makes sense really in terms of the progression of his career that he would do another season at Leverkusen. I think, take them into the Champions League, test yourself in that environment first at a club where the expectation isn't that you're going to go and win the Champions League. I think, doing it in that non-pressure environment will be really good for his development as a manager. And I also think, look, if he doesn't win the Bundesliga title next season, he's definitely going to win it this season. Let's face it, he's got a 10-point lead with very few games to go. But if he doesn't win it next season, I don't think that impacts his standing as a football manager. I think the fact that he's performed miracles by getting Leverkusen there this season, that really stands him in good stead, and no one would judge him if Bayern Munich sort of roared back next season and won the Bundesliga title. So, as I say, for a couple of reasons really, it makes sense really that he would stay at Leverkusen, I think, from his personal perspective. But of course, our focus is on Liverpool and what it means for them, and they weren't all in on Alonso. They have, of course, been prepared for this possibility that Alonso might want to stay or maybe even go to Bayern Munich as an alternative. So they've been doing the due diligence on other managers in the background, having a look at who else could be a good fit. And I really want to focus on one of the alternatives that stood out to me in doing my due diligence, in fact, in terms of who might be the next Liverpool manager. And that is, of course, Ruben Amorim at Sporting. Now, having a look at the numbers behind his team, the coaching journey he's been on so far. And as I say, I think he's the real standout for me, just behind Alonso, who's no doubt the outstanding young coach in Europe at the moment. I think Amorim is not too far behind, and I'm going to dig into this in this video and have a look at the numbers. Maybe let me know before you watch this video how you feel about Amorim. Is he maybe second choice behind Alonso for you? And if not, maybe I can convince you with the numbers and the background that I've got here. But I'll get straight into it. And I think that a good place to start really in terms of his what he's like as a coach is to look at really the surface level stuff and his maybe his coaching history. Now, his first experience in coaching after he had a good playing career actually, where he's at Benfica, won a lot of trophies there, and a couple of loan spells elsewhere, and he got 14 Portugal caps in the end. So he was a pretty decent player, you'd have to say, but got into coaching quite young when he'd hung up his boots and started a Portuguese third tier outfit called Casapia, and he was appointed there in July 18. But he actually didn't last very long there, and the reason was because he didn't have the coaching qualifications to coach at that time, so he wasn't actually allowed to coach, so had to move on pretty quickly and leave there and finish up his coaching qualifications. But he had made a decent impact, and they actually went on to get promoted at the end of that season, so some early signs there that he was having a little bit of an impact. Now, his next move was to coach Braga reserves. He'd been on loan at Braga previously in his playing career and obviously made a very decent impact there when he was appointed in September 2019, because by December he had been appointed to be the first team coach, and that is because, of course, a sacking was made and the first team vacancy opened up, and obviously what Braga had seen in that very short amount of time with Braga reserves was enough to make him get the step up. Now, I'm talking about a meteoric rise here, and that just continued at Braga. Absolutely remarkable. He actually only oversaw 13 games in charge of Braga before he makes his next move. And now, within those 13 games, the reason he was so outstanding in that period and so many clubs were taking notice, he got Braga's first win at Benfica in 65 years. So that's pretty impressive. But then he also wins a trophy. He beats, in fact, before that I mentioned that his first game finished in a 7-1 win as well, so not a bad impact to start with. And he also wins a trophy, of course, after that. Beats Porto, who were the champions that year in the Taça da Liga, which is kind of like the Portuguese League Cup. He beat them late in the final, 1-0 win. So wins a trophy at Braga and then doesn't even complete the season before Sporting Lisbon have a vacancy open up for their manager, and they look who's the outstanding young coach around, and it was of course Amorim. 13 games into his managerial career, quite a big risk you have to say that Sporting took, and they actually paid 10 million euros to release him from his contract at Braga, which I think a lot of fans were kind of sceptical about and thought that was a huge risk, and probably rightly so with the lack of experience that he had, but that was absolutely repaid with everything that he's done at Sporting since. So in his first full season there, wins Sporting's first title in 19 years. Incredibly impressive achievement. Adds another Taça da Liga as well. So an unbelievable start really in his first proper top flight job where he gets a full season in charge. He does that, which I think marks him out, as I say, as one of the top young coaches in Europe now. Seasons since haven't been as successful, you have to say, just looking at his record here. In the season following that, just wins the Taça da Liga again and finished second, and then the season after that, so last season, finishes fourth, runner-up in the Taça da Liga again. So that was a bit of a disappointing season last season, but you look this season, they've roared back to life. Sporting, really impressive. They sit first in the Primeira Liga. They've got a game in hand as well as a points advantage there. They're into the semi-finals of the Portuguese Cup as well. We're knocked out in the Portuguese League Cup in the semis, but on track for an extremely successful season. And I would say all that put together shows really a coach who's succeeded everywhere he's been so far, and the fact that he's won what he's won at Sporting, really, you think of them as definitely one of Portugal's big clubs, but they hadn't won a league title in 19 years, kind of similar to a drought that Liverpool went on that we all know about, of course. And they do not have a similar sized budget to Porto and Benfica, so they're always against that. They're always the sort of third biggest team in theory in the league, and so the fact he's overcome those hurdles and won those trophies, I think marks him out as a great young manager. And he's also in and amongst that. He went on a 32-game unbeaten run in the league in the season that Sporting won the title, which is a Portuguese record. One defeat all season that year as well. So just putting up incredible achievements in what has been a very short managerial career. And I think, even if you just look at the surface level stuff there, that shows you that Amorim is an extremely promising coach and one who should be on the radar of Liverpool. Of course, we don't just look at the surface level stuff, and Liverpool absolutely won't. They will be digging into the numbers to see what profile of coach they're getting, where he really excels, and there's a lot of numbers here that really stand out to me as well, so I'll get into those. Before we get into that, actually, I want to talk a little bit about style, just again, another surface level thing. He uses kind of a 3-4-3 formation. That's his favourite at the moment, which actually has similarities to what Xabi Alonso is using at Bayer Leverkusen. So maybe that's something Liverpool would factor in if they were willing to go to that with Alonso, that sort of type of style, and they see Amorim doing similar things. Maybe that will be quite attractive. Now, when I talk about the numbers behind Amorim, it's important to stress that when I did the Alonso video, I was looking at the comparisons with top 5 leagues, which of course the Premier League, Bundesliga, La Liga, Liga and Serie A as well. Now, of course, Portugal is not in that, so I can't compare him to Premier League sides and how they look with that. I can't compare it to Bundesliga sides. That comparison, I cannot draw that up because he's not within a top 5 league. So I'm just going to be looking for comparisons within the Portuguese league, but I still think there's a lot of really interesting stuff here in terms of what he's good at, where the strengths are and what the style really will look for like for Liverpool. Now I'll start with defence because I think that's always the first thing that top managers really sort out, and I will actually say that Klopp himself, it kind of goes under the radar that he's quite a defensive manager really. That's the area of the team he wants sorted first, and then he gets all the free flow and attacking going. He really is a defensively minded coach. That's why his Borussia Dortmund team were so good in terms of the defensive record. Liverpool are really difficult to break down as well, aren't they? So I think that is a really important starting point for managers. And I would say that absolutely Sporting Lisbon, they look like a very strong team defensively. I mean, I look at the record this season. Now, they have actually got the 3rd best defence in the Portuguese league with 25 goals conceded. Porto have conceded just 18 and Benfica just behind them with 21. But when you look at the underlying numbers, the defensive performance is actually much better than that. Maybe the Sporting have been slightly unlucky in the goals they've conceded because the expected goals against, they've only posted 19.2 in that, and that is the best record in the Portuguese league. Better than Porto, 21.6. Better than Benfica, 26. So they've got the best expected goals against. So that defence is really solid. And the reason for that is because they don't allow a lot of shots against them. So second best in the league for shots on target against per 90, 2.56. Porto with 2.38, which is the best record, but only marginally ahead. And Benfica with actually whopping 3.62. So absolutely got a really good defensive defensive structure there that really helps them out and provides a strong base. And we actually know this about Amorim as well, because this isn't kind of a fluke season he's having where they're just defending well or things are going for them. They only conceded 20 goals in the season that they won the title, so that's in a 34 game season. So that shows you that really is sort of a defensive bedrock. And again, in terms of shots against, I want to make this point as well, that it's not just about the shots on target against, it's just shots in general. They don't allow a lot of shots against them. So shots per 90 against is 7.76 this season, which is the best in the league, again ahead of Porto, again ahead of Benfica. So that defensive underlying performance is very much there, and I think that's a really encouraging sign for Liverpool, that he can absolutely coach a defence that wins a league title. And we're seeing that not just this season, but we've seen it in past seasons at Sporting. Now, in terms of how they go about that, we know a big aspect of Jurgen Klopp's defensive approach, and very much Xabi Alonso as well, is that high press. It's what you want to see all modern managers doing, really. That is the way to win football games in this day and age. And actually, it's interesting, really. Amorim's been talked about as sort of a manager who really emphasises the defensive press. But when you look at the numbers, what I'm seeing is that, yes, it's an element of the game, and they are aggressive, but it maybe not as wed to it as a Jurgen Klopp. He's not as aggressive, maybe. And there's upsides and downsides to that, which I'll maybe get into. But let's just look at the numbers, and you look where they stand for tackles attempted in the final third. So in the opposition defensive third, are they pressing really high? Are they trying things? And they're actually third for that in the Portuguese league at the moment. 2.2 tackles attempted in the final third per 90. Porto ahead of them, and Benfica do a lot more with 3.19. Sorry. So I think that's kind of interesting that. They're not absolutely the outstanding pressers in the Portuguese league, but it is something they do. In terms of presses in the middle third, the second for that, again, just behind Benfica again. So I think what we're seeing from these numbers is that Benfica slightly more aggressive in the press. Amorim, his teams do want to press, but they're not quite as aggressive as Benfica, and certainly not as aggressive as Porto in that final third area as well. So I think that's an interesting thing. Now, there are positives and negatives to that. I think, positives, we know the Klopp press, how vital that's been to what Liverpool have done in recent seasons, and helped them sort of punch above the weight. And that's something that Liverpool kind of need to do when you're up against the likes of Man City with the money they spend and some of the other big spending sides. But I also say, that aggressive press, sometimes you do question whether that has led to some of the injury problems that Liverpool have had. And if they slightly just tweak that back a little bit, slightly less aggressive, will that lead to less injuries? I'm just hypothesising there, but I think it's an interesting factor to sort of think about. So a press that's aggressive, but maybe not Klopp aggressive. And I think so that gives you an idea what Liverpool would maybe be getting in terms of the style of play. So I think that's an interesting thing to point out. Now, another area I want to look at, of course, look to the defence, look to the style in terms of the pressing and how they do that. Also want to look at the attack and whether they're very good going forward. And absolutely what we see in the numbers is a side that is good going forward and generates a lot of shots. So shots on target per 90 that Sporting have generated this season, 6.36. That puts them just second in the league behind Benfica, who are on 6.69. But I also think that it shows that they're a very attacking side. They're very capable. We know they've got that defensive balance there, but that doesn't come at the expense of the attack. You show there that you've got a side that is very good in the attacking sense. And expected goals per 90 also very good, 2.21, which again puts them just second, but only marginally behind Benfica, who are 2.22. So nothing in that really. So they're generating a lot of shots across the 90 minutes. They're generating a lot of expected goals. They're just a really good team in terms of their attacking, and actually that has sort of bore fruit in terms of they are the number one goal scorers in the division. 73 goals scored this season, which is miles ahead of anyone else. Benfica have only got 59, Porto 50. And that is actually thanks to a really large overperformance in terms of expected goals. They've got 73 goals from expected goals of 55.2. But I would say, look, that overperformance, again, not a freak thing that you're looking at and thinking, well, if he can't reproduce that, then his teams aren't very good. We know he can produce a title-winning attack. He has won the league. And yes, this overperformance is happening this season, but it's happening off the back of good underlying metrics in terms of the amounts of shots that Sporting are generating, and just their general attacking threat looks really, really good, and the expected goals is up there with any other team. So that overperformance, maybe I would say, is not anything to worry about, and I think it's just a kind of freak thing that's happening this season. But the underlying numbers still support that Amorim is very good in defence, very good in attack. So, encouraging signs in all that, I would absolutely say. Now, in terms of how they attack, we looked at the press in terms of how they defend. In terms of how they attack, I want to look at possession and how they use that, because I think it was an interesting thing to maybe note that there was a real difference between Xabi Alonso as a Jurgen Klopp successor and the style he was looking to bring. I think there were really marked differences there, whereas Amorim maybe some slightly more similarities in terms of that. So we'll kind of look at the amount of passes that they play in a game. So that's a really good indicator, because Bayer Leverkusen, you remember, were top 5 in Europe's top 5 leagues actually for that, with 644.6 passes per 90 minutes, which is an awful lot. I mean, by comparison, Liverpool 518.7, so quite a big gap there. Leverkusen absolutely love to pass the ball around, and interestingly, Sporting just below that as well, 478.7. So more in that sort of region that Liverpool are. Maybe that makes Amorim a better stylistic fit for the squad that Liverpool have built. I think very much an interesting one to note. And another thing that sort of caught my eye as well is I've seen a lot of talk about Amorim being kind of direct and obviously aggressive in terms of pressing, but also direct with it, and that makes him sound like a sort of counter-attacking team. So I looked into the numbers behind that and to try and ascertain whether that was actually the case, and kind of interested me actually. They were the lowest in the Premier Liga for long passes played, 64.3 per 90, which shows that when they're playing counter-attacking football, and they are definitely capable of it, they're actually kind of going with those shorter, quick passes when they're playing the counter-attacks, rather than win the ball quickly, get it forward, and really, really direct in that sense. So yes, they can be a counter-attacking side, but not with long passes. Definitely more those shorter passes and quick exchanges than that. So they can do that counter-attacking thing. But I would also say, when I'm saying about their ability in possession and whether they can dominate the ball, they still do well in that regard. They're not a Leverkusen. They don't want that Xabi Alonso. He's not an absolute slave to possession in that sense. Very, very sort of different in that way. But they still play a lot of short passes. So second for short passes in the Premier League, fourth for medium passes. So that just shows you, I think, that they kind of mix it up a little bit. They're not absolutely wed to little exchanges and camped around the box, that style of possession. But they can be dominant in that way. And they're still the fourth in the league for possession, 58.6%, which obviously puts them behind Benfica and Porto and a couple of other sides as well. So that is different to Leverkusen again, 62.9%, and City are out top with 65%. So I think what we're seeing there is kind of that Amorim really is kind of flexible. He isn't wed to one style completely. He can do the quick counter-attacking, he can do the short dominant passing in possession, but they will find different ways to attack, different ways to dominate and use the ball, and that Sporting are multifaceted really in sort of the threat. And I'm not saying that is better, by the way. You can sometimes be a jack of all trades in that sense, and maybe not excelling in one aspect, and we very much know that Alonso is wed to that possession style, and it absolutely works for him, doesn't it? And very similar with Pep Guardiola. But I think we have seen that adaptability from Jurgen Klopp, haven't we? Is that he's had sides that are unbelievable in the counter-attack and can move the ball and be very direct, and they like to sling in crosses, but also a side that can camp around the box and be technical and unlock teams in that way. So it's kind of horses for courses in that way, and you think, if he is a little bit of a match for Jurgen Klopp in that way and is very, very flexible, then again, that's absolutely a huge upside to his appeal, really. And it's hard to say that when he's just in the Portuguese league at the moment, and whether he can make the step up. That, of course, is absolutely the huge question around it. But I do think it's interesting just to look at that sort of tactical profile and how he sits. So I think that gives you a good idea of style and the different ways that Amorim can play, and also, as I say, defence and attack, really good signs in terms of that. But I'm going to go on to, just to finish up, kind of a few more general points around him as well, and look at his career so far. And maybe it'll start with a couple of maybe downsides and concerns that have been raised around him. And one of those is his record in Europe. So I'll just reel off sort of what he's done so far. In his first season in charge, a playoff defeat to Lask in the Europa League. Obviously, that's a poor result for a club the size of Sporting. Second season, last 16, knocked out by Manchester City in the Champions League. Absolutely no disgrace in that. They got beat 5-0 on aggregate, but thinking about the difference between the size of the clubs and the money they've got, that there's no shame in that. Season after that, third in the Champions League group behind Tottenham, Eintracht Frankfurt, and Marseille were also in that group and finished last. So a really, really tough group actually, and they finished third in there. They went on to get knocked out in the Europa League by Juventus, but prior to that, in the round of 16, they actually beat Arsenal. Mikel Arteta's Arsenal knocked them out, so really impressive result. I do remember watching that as well, actually, and being really impressed by Sporting, the way they played in that tie, particularly the second leg. So I think that was, there'd been some green shoots in there, and I think this season, just finish off with that, they got through the Europa League group and got knocked out by Atalanta in the round of 16, and we'll see actually how bad of a result or good a result that will be on the basis of Liverpool facing Atalanta in the next round, and we'll see whether they cause Liverpool real problems or not. So it's kind of tough to judge that one, but I think in terms of his European record, definitely some improvement needed there. It doesn't jump out as incredible. You think of Mourinho winning the European Cup with Porto when he was in Portugal. It doesn't absolutely stand out here. But I would say there is mitigation there. As I say, it's not a top league, the Portuguese league, is it? The money that they've got in comparison to other leagues, that can make it difficult for them to go deep in Europe. And so there is mitigation there, and I think, you can only say that you can only work with the tools you've got, and you would like a few more of those shock results, like the Arsenal one, where that really stands out to me as impressive. You'd like a few more of those scattered around. But as I say, Premier League, the money that's floating around there is not similar to some of the teams they've come up against. So maybe don't hold that against him too hard, really. And if he does get appointed at Liverpool, we'll quickly find out how good he is in Europe. He'll certainly be helped by the fact that Anfield is an absolute fortress in European competition. So maybe we'll have to find out on that front. Now, another maybe a downside we can talk about is the release clause that's being talked about now. A lot of conflicting reports around this. I tried to ask someone, a good source today, in terms of, where does it actually stand on this? Because the numbers we're getting talked about are between 17 million, 25 million. It could be anything in between that, or maybe even lower than that. And the source I spoke to said it's kind of a hard one to talk about at the moment. We'll kind of find out about that, I suppose, in terms of if Liverpool do go to trigger it, or if maybe an alternative club come in for Amorim. But that is extremely expensive, you have to say, and with those concerns in Europe, maybe those two come together. Is that too expensive to be paying for a manager who maybe doesn't have that track record in Europe? We'll have to see in terms of that. And of course, I would say with the reports around the release clause is that, as I say, the source I spoke to today, not kind of certain around whether those numbers are entirely accurate that are being reported. So maybe they're not accurate. But again, it's something to weigh up, something Liverpool, if they do want to go for Amorim, will have to think about going forward, and whether they'd be willing to pay that amount for a coach to bring him in who's not got maybe a Jurgen Klopp style record. But anyway, we'll have to see how that goes. Now, I'm going to finish up with, in terms of this general chat, with another couple of upsides, and one of those I want to talk about is looking at what Sporting are doing this season, actually. And one of the big problems he had last season was in terms of, they felt that they weren't scoring enough goals, they weren't enough of a threat in the attacking third. And I think what you've got to give Amorim huge credit for is that he's had that down season. He's had the ups of winning the title, had that down season there and finishing fourth, which is a disappointing result with the seasons he'd had prior to that. But he identified the clear issue. They got him Victor Gyökeres from Coventry City, and he has been absolutely prolific. And I think that speaks really highly to Amorim. Maybe player recruitment, that is something that's not in his hands. It's something that happens above him in terms of identifying players. But in terms of identifying the problem that his team had and the solution for it, he was absolutely part of that. And I think that's really encouraging. We've seen Jurgen Klopp have down seasons at Liverpool, difficult moments, but he's been able every time, and particularly, last summer's a really good example of this. He's identified the problem, moved forward and sorted it out, and then the next season Liverpool have bounced straight back. So having that skill and showing that, I think, is really encouraging from Amorim. And another aspect I want to talk about, again links into Jurgen Klopp and similarities there, is the faith he's shown in young players at Sporting. To reel off a couple who were involved this season, Ousmane Diomande, who's a player Liverpool like and have looked at, central defender. He's only 20 years old and playing that position with that lack of experience. Huge faith from the manager to use him. Gonzalo Inacio, he's 22 now, but he's, again, a player who has been used by an even younger age by Amorim, and he's been the one who's really brought him through, and he's someone who's caught the eye of multiple clubs across Europe have looked at him. So again, he's in that defence. He's only 22 years old, and there's other players that he's been able to bring through and really sort of allowed to blossom. Bruno Fernandes, Mateus Nunes, Pedro Porro, Nuno Mendes, they're all at massive clubs now, and were all used at very young ages by Amorim. So he's absolutely got that ability to bring in young players and show faith in them. And Liverpool, look at the academy and what it's producing at the moment. That is a massive factor in who is going to be the next Liverpool manager. I think they need someone who's going to show that faith in youth and keep that up, because that's been a big factor in Jurgen Klopp's reign. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to conclude with the fact that I think on paper Amorim looks a lot to like about him. I think the only real question mark maybe is that European record, but I'm sure the people who are crunching the numbers at Liverpool will be able to find out more about that, the reasons behind that, and whether that is going to be a massive concern for them, or whether it's something that can be disregarded because there's mitigation around it. And I will say that for me, I think that Amorim is the second cab off the rank. I think he should be the second choice behind Alonso, who we know obviously Liverpool can't get now, so maybe Amorim should be the first choice, so to speak. And I think there's just enough there, and I think one aspect that goes for him massively against Roberto De Zerbi, who is another one of the managers who's been strongly linked, is that it's not De Zerbi's fault. He's actually more encouraging than you'd maybe think when you look at the underlying numbers. I know his teams can get thrashed sometimes, but I think he's doing an incredible job with Brighton's budget. But I think the one thing that puts Amorim ahead of me, even disregarding the underlying numbers, because De Zerbi is also strong there, I think the one thing that puts him ahead is the fact he's won trophies at a club that is expected to do it. He's dealt with that pressure. He's got the 1-0 wins late in the game. The scruffy wins that win you titles. The defensive solidity you need to show. He's already shown that. He's dealt with the pressure at the highest level, and it's not De Zerbi's fault that he hasn't had that at Brighton. But I still think that Liverpool will feel there's a little bit more of a guarantee about Amorim because he's done it, he's won major trophies, and he comes into a side which again, he's already had those expectations in terms of creating a really, really dominant side that can win trophies and has shown that he can do that. So I think that's something that massively goes in his favour. So let me know in the comments what you think. Maybe you disagree, maybe De Zerbi would be your favourite, maybe there's a name that hasn't been linked to Liverpool you would like to see linked, maybe that, but let me know as well what you think about Amorim, where you think he should stand in the pecking order, whether you think he should be the next choice with Alonso not coming to Liverpool. Always interested to hear your thoughts, and as ever I'm going to ask if you can like and subscribe. Always really helpful to grow the channel. Try and put a lot of research into these videos, and I hope you're really enjoying them, because I'm enjoying doing them as well. So thank you as ever for watching, and I will see you very soon.